Welcome. It is truly an honor for me to speak to you today as a keynote. I've had the privilege of doing some of the breakout sessions over the years, but was just thrilled to death when it was announced several years ago that I would be the keynote speaker. Of course, Carl has taken the first 3 slides off my, but we'll get through this anyway. Yes, my latest book is A Brief History of Northern Kentucky. I'm going to take a little moment today and say, well, at least part of this is going to be the making of A Brief History of Northern Kentucky. For me to cover my book, we would need about 3.5, 4 hours because we're talking about millions of years of history. But he already took care of this for me. I guess my greatest accomplishment as being past president of the Kenton County Historical Society for many years, probably too many to mention. But I started out thinking, why a new book? That was the big question on my mind. And because my wife knows how much money we make off of local history books. So but I'm working 2 full-time jobs and just had some spare time on my hands. So I thought, but why a new book? Well, as he said, Northern Kentuckians are often left out of statewide issues. Little interest from folks in Frankfort. We seem to have more cooperation from folks in Hamilton County and Cincinnati. For instance, the I-71-75 bridge. That's a collaboration between the two of them. We're considered South Cincinnati, as you well know, by many in the region. When it comes to history, we are almost always linked in with the history of Boonesboro, the Wilderness Road, and the rest of the state, which we should not be. We have our own history. I've been frustrated for years as I research, trying to find good information on other books that have existed for years. The Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky was well welcomed, but it weighs about 30 pounds, so it's really not a great read, but a tremendous amount of great information in there. So I said, maybe we do need a new book, something just about Northern Kentucky. And what I did, before I really decided to take the plunge, was I made a list. And I wanted to put together 25 or 30 people, places, and events only important to Northern Kentuckians, such as James Taylor, the founder of Newport. We have Thomas Kennedy, whose property became the city of Covington. I looked at Rabbit Hash General Store, which has been in operation since 1831. I looked at the Cathedral Basilica, one of the most beautiful churches anywhere, as well as Banklick Creek, which is a major transportation route for early pioneers. I also included the Bulletsburg Baptist Church, which was organized in 1794 and is still in existence today. So I grabbed 9 other books on Kentucky history, A New History of Kentucky, a concise history of Kentucky, Kentucky Yesterday and Today, Thomas Clark's A History of Kentucky, the Kentucky Encyclopedia, and many more. And not surprising to me, and probably not surprising to you, James Taylor had a short reference in 2 of those books, but it was after the War of 1812 and nothing to do with his founding of Newport. Thomas Kennedy was not mentioned in any of the books, nor was Rabbit Hash, the Cathedral, Banklick Creek, Bulletsburg Baptist Church, and most upsetting, as Carl pointed out, 2 of the books were released well after 1977, one calling it A Concise History of Kentucky, and neither mentioned the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, a fire that killed 169 people and remains one of the worst disasters in the Commonwealth today. Clearly, Northern Kentucky needed its own history book. Amen. Amen. Can we get an amen? Now, this certainly is a compilation. Multiple previously published articles and books were studied and used. Northern Kentucky Heritage Magazine, if you are not a subscriber to that, please do so by the end of the day. The Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, as I mentioned, a history of Grant County, Boone County, from Mastodons to the Millennial, Campbell County, Kentucky, 200 years, Covington, Kentucky, the Gateway City, a centennial history of Erlanger, Kentucky, and many more. but it is also linked with a tremendous amount of brand new research. In-depth studies of current trends and vices, such as the heroin and opioid epidemic and drug treatment centers, the recent revitalization of the inner cities, the explosion of downtown living by young professionals. And I've also tried very, very diligently to separate fact from fiction regarding previous research, rewriting the Christopher Gist stories and his travels, for one example, and defining the 3 L's that represent the 3L highway, which had some folklore as well. So there's a tremendous amount of new research as well. Is it complete and concise? Of course not. A concise history of Northern Kentucky would need to be several thousand pages, but it contains a tremendous amount of information on the people and places and events important to Northern Kentucky. I like to say it covers the upper 10 counties from before the Ohio River existed to the building of the Ark at Williamstown. So that is why there's a new book. So today I'm going to give a general overview of what is in the book. Obviously, as I mentioned, I can't put it all in there. But I hope that you would be impressed with the amount of information that's in the book. I am quite sure I'm going to have someone, probably more than one, come and say, well, why didn't you put so-and-so in there? Why didn't you put... Well, we'll work on that. So before the Ohio River existed, certainly. The first chapter is a prehistory of the region. Pre-glacier information, never before detailed in book form, is included in this. Post-glacier animals, the ancient civilizations. And I've got in red here just to make mention, if you are not aware, there's a new historical highway marker that is dedicated to the ancient civilizations that were here in Northern Kentucky. It is located in Pioneer Park, the south end of Pioneer Park, so you may want to check that out. The Taze River system is included, of course, here long before the Ohio River existed, before glacier activity. The ancient Kentucky River, ancient Licking River is mentioned. And, of course, the after-glacier activity that brought about the discovery of Big Bone, the birthplace of American vertebrate paleontology. Most of you know, because I think we're all history fans in here, that those massive herds of animals are what created through their yearly migration habits, are what created the early pathways and early ancient civilization pathways that led to the creation of today's highways, such as US 25 and DeCourcy Pike. So those known migration trails are detailed in the book, as well as evidence of the ancient civilizations, some scattered artifacts and some burial mounds that are known to exist, and a few that are still visible to the eye and not hidden away. This is a burial mound on Route 11 in southeastern Mason County that is still easily visible. We have the early Northern Kentucky explorers. Of course, some of you know the story of Dr. Thomas Walker, who apparently was the first European explorer in Kentucky. Of course, we know that's not true. The fact is there were several French explorers who predate Walker by decades, Dutch and Spanish explorers as well, and from my research, the earliest seems to be Hernando de Soto, who was in parts of Kentucky as early as May 1541. So, sorry, Dr. Thomas Walker. Christopher Gist, for some unknown reason, Gist is noted in many early histories as the first European to explore what is now Northern Kentucky with the Ohio Land Company in 1750. Authors claim he traveled down the Ohio River, camped at what is now Covington, visited Big Bone, explored the falls of the Ohio. Simply not true. The fact is his journals are extremely detailed and fairly easy to follow for the most part. He was never at present-day Covington, Big Bone, or Louisville. Again, based on my research, what we know on the left, what we've been told as far as the Big Bone story, he writes when he was just west of present-day Portsmouth, he says, quote, "Here I met 2 men belonging to Robert Smith and one Hugh Crawford, they were returning from an area where large bones were found, and they gave me some of the bones. So in reality, the bones were found by Robert Smith's men and given to Gist, who was nowhere near Big Bone at the time, and there's nothing in his journals to suggest that he ever went there. As far as Covington, we've been told that he followed the Ohio River from Pittsburgh down to the mouth of the Licking, but in his journals, he clearly states that he went due west after leaving Pittsburgh into the Ohio country and entered Kentucky at opposite Portsmouth. So we hopefully clear that up a little bit. Mary Ingalls, the Draper Meadows Massacre is well detailed, and of course, if you don't know the story of Mary Ingalls, well, buy the book. But it's very important and certainly was worth a couple of pages in my history. Skirmishes with early Indians are actually included, including the attacks at Boonesboro and elsewhere, and you say, well, wait a minute, that's central Kentucky, what's going on here? But I clearly described the main warpath into central Kentucky being that DeCourcy Pike, Bowman Creek, and South Fork of the Licking. That's extremely important to northern Kentucky. Bryan Station, Hingston Fort, again, those are central Kentucky battles for the most part, including the Battle of Blue Licks, which again has been called the last battle of the Revolutionary War, which it was not. But it's important to include that in my book because many of the early residents there became citizens of northern Kentucky. Our earliest residents, James Taylor, Edmund Rittenhouse. Who golfs at Twin Oaks? Edmund Rittenhouse. George Stockton, John Fleming, Jacob Fowler, nearly 30 others are mentioned, as well as some of the historic homes that are still standing. The Prettyman Mary house, Abner Gaines, William Arnold, nearly a dozen old houses in Old Washington, the Fowler home in Union. This is a sketch of Yateman's Cove from Newport, the early description of Lisanaville. But the first towns in Kentucky, Port William, Kennedy's Ferry, Newport, Maysville. More early families are mentioned, and I won't read this list, but I tried to pay some tribute to the early families that lived in the upper 10 counties. As far as the early 1800s, the Newport Barracks were built, Lewis and Clark's expedition and its importance to northern Kentucky. The earthquakes in Kentucky from December 1811 to 1812 are mentioned, as well as a short excerpt from a letter that I found from someone's journals. This hit me hard, and maybe it won't be the same to you, but you have to remember at this time, no one knew what an earthquake was. You had people in New York and Boston that maybe had read about something like that in the newspapers, but for the people, in this case, a little southwest of Louisville, they had no idea what was going on. I'm going to read just a short passage. This is December 16th, 1811. There was a great shaking of the earth this morning. Tables and chairs turned over and knocked around. All of us knocked out of our bed. The roar, I thought, would leave us deaf if we lived. It was not a storm. When you could hear anything, it was the screams of people and animals. When you could not hold on to nothing, for no man nor woman strong enough. When it got daybreak, you could see the damage done. We still had our home, had some damage. Those whose home was not built too strong did not. I made my mind to one thing: if this did not happen in the territory of Indiana, then me and my family is moving as soon as I find my animals. And this went on for almost 4 months, but he writes on January 23rd, 1812, what are we going to do? You can't fight it because you don't know how. If it was a storm, you could see the dark clouds and know you might get strong winds, but this, you cannot see anything but a house that just lays in a pile on the ground and trees that just fall over with the roots still attached. We lost our Amandy Jane in this one. A log fell on her. So this had to be absolutely terrifying for these people. But after the War of 1812, Covington established early primary roads become turnpikes, covered bridges are erected all over the place. I love this picture. The bottom left is a toll road at Constance. Northern Kentucky welcomes industry. We have the Covington Cotton Factory, steam-driven sawmills in Newport, Maysville, and elsewhere. Slaughterhouses and breweries become commonplace, as well as the railroads coming through. So all of this is mentioned. Into the mid-1800s, mineral spas are the rage. Latonia Springs, Blue Lick Springs, Big Bone Lick, and elsewhere. Population in the region explodes, mainly through German and Irish immigration. And we have the wonderful Rabbit Hash General Store. Stephen Foster is mentioned, and I'm sorry, but most of you are probably aware that new research indicates that he probably was never in the city of Bardstown. If he got any inspiration at all, it was probably from Augusta, maybe Covington, but he's never been. And one of my favorite finds, Godfrey Frankenstein, I learned was a oil painting artist that did some 26 paintings of the Bank Lick area, and I located this one in the Cincinnati Art Museum. And if you study hard, I have to do this because this Madison Pike in Fort Wright, the animal clinic sits right up here just north of the tank bus garage. The golf driving range is right down here, and we're looking north in 1851 along Madison Pike. I just find that fascinating. People say, gosh, I wish it was still like that today. It may take you about 8 hours to get to work, but it would be beautiful. Slavery, of course, included in the book, but it's our history, not the history from central and western Kentucky. The fact is, few slaves were here compared to the rest of the state. Of course, Mason and Grant County were more heavily populated. The slave auctions are mentioned, however. Most slave-owning families were in the western part of the state. Our importance, of course, was the Underground Railroad, but again, there's some facts that have been thrown around that needed to be disproved. It seems that everyone along the river in Covington had slave tunnels. Well, that of course, is not true. I like this one because I went to and graduated from Holmes High School, and it was rumored for forever that there were slave tunnels under the Holmes Castle, which of course was not even built till after the. But anyway, of course we know most runaways found their freedom in Gallatin and Carroll and Mason counties, Bracken counties. But a lot of the runaway slaves and their supporters are well detailed in the book. We take a couple of chapters to do that. The Margaret Garner story and that tragedy is, again, well defined and again, a little bit too elaborate to get into today. The Civil War and, the city of Cincinnati can certainly thank us for, protecting them. We have maps of the various batteries and forts that were erected here, as well as the skirmishes that took place. And I know, I'm not going to elaborate and make this sound like, by Northern Kentucky skirmishes, we talk about a couple of rebels and a couple of Union soldiers that saw each other from a mile away and ran. But how it got reported was another story. But they did come through Crittenden along the Lexington Turnpike with plans to overtake Cincinnati. They made it to about 10 miles south of Covington. The skirmish at Snow's Pond between Richwood and Walton was a little bit more elaborate. Shots fired in downtown Florence. The September 15th incident where rebels marched through Independence and met Union forces at what is now Old Madison Pike and Fowler Creek. And of course, the battles at Augusta and Cynthiana they saw much heavier action and are far more detailed, of course. After the Civil War, Northern Kentucky was still almost completely segregated. Blacks were denied access to such places as parks, restaurant lunch counters, public bathrooms. The 1874 legislation that passed some laws that certainly helped. But in our case, Jacob Price, William Grant, Isaac Black, the color schools that opened throughout the 10 counties, those are all well represented. Highlights, John Roebling's Suspension Bridge in 1866. Of course, it's been updated and reinforced over the years and still open to the public. Important people and places. In the late 1800s, Daniel Carter Beard, who helped found what became the Boy Scouts of America. George Hill, Frank Duveneck, whose painting you see here. The Coppin Department Store, Eilerman's, industries such as rolling mills, furniture factories are opened throughout the region. We have the Latonia Racetrack, which opened in 1883. A lot of people are unaware that the Latonia Derby was bigger than the Kentucky Derby for many years, known as one of the most beautiful racetracks. Between 1883 and 1927, when it closed, a total of 27 Kentucky Derby winners raced at Old Latonia, and it closed in 1939, actually. The Ludlow Lagoon is featured, of course, opened in 1895. Flooding, a tornado, prohibition, and a horrible accident on the motorcycle track eventually closed the park in 1918. Closing out the century, we have the bridge collapse over the Licking River, the incredible Pearl Bryan murder and decapitation. William Remke opens what eventually became the region's first self-service grocery. Jackson Florist is still open. George Wiedemann is producing more beer than any other brewery south of the Ohio River. At the early 1900s, we have the Donaldson Lithographic Company that opens, printing colorful posters for Ringling Brothers and others. The Benedictine monks from Pennsylvania buy the Old Thompson Winery. And of course, I cancel out the fact that this is the smallest church in the world. It's not, but really not a church at all, but its true history is included. The Cathedral Basilica, Devou Park, and Haven Gillespie. Who knows Haven Gillespie? Oh, look, see, I love this place. Santa Claus is coming to town for everyone else. Is from Covington. Early 1900s continued. We have the first moving pictures shown in the region, ice and milk delivery, bathing beaches in Dayton, Bellevue. The Dixie Terminal opens in Cincinnati. The early 1930s to 1940s, we have the infiltration of the mob in Covington and especially Newport. George Remus, Pete Schmidt, Beverly Hills opens. The Cleveland Four is who I'm speaking of, but everyone has heard of the Primrose, Tropicana, Flamingo. Not uncommon at all to see Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Marilyn Monroe walking up and down Monmouth Street. So that was a wonderful time, we think. The flooding of 37, of course, well detailed in the book, almost several pages anyway. And most of you have seen some of these incredible pictures and some of the details that are included. This is a shot of Scott Boulevard looking south at 7th Street. We have World War II, the Iwo Jima, and Pat Scott. Like, well, how does this all work together? Well, Fleming County's Franklin Sowsley is included in the famous picture that you see there. And then we have the Girls All-American Professional Baseball League. If you've seen the movie A League of Their Own, Pat Scott was from mainly Boone County, and she played for the Rockford Peaches. The automobile is introduced into the region, movie theaters, as I mentioned, and more. We have Alexandria Pike, Dixie Highway, the 3L Highway, gas stations, motels, restaurants erupting all through the region from south of Covington and Newport in every direction. Pictures there of the Marianne and the Madison. The Denloo, Schilling's Drive-In Motel and Restaurant, the Cane Tuck Restaurant, which has been gone now for many years. And of course the Gourmet Strip, which most of you have heard of, the many restaurants that dotted Dixie Highway from Covington all the way to Williamstown. But within a decade after I-75 opened, many of those were closed. Civil rights movement and urban flight, the 1950s marches and demonstrations, segregation, of course, being a major issue in especially public school systems. Urban flight seemed to go hand in hand. The national trend was already taking place before desegregation sent many families away. I say, well, how did it start locally? Well, before 1955, everyone shopped at their neighborhood grocery, their neighborhood market, their neighborhood bakery. But in November of 1955, the Newport Shopping Center opened. Obviously an asset to most of the region, but immediately shops along Monmouth Street saw a decrease in business, a lost customer base that they never really reversed. And while the populations of Newport and Covington had grown steadily for decades, that trend stopped and eventually reversed by the mid-1960s and early 1970s. Well, we have interstate highways that made it easier than ever to live outside the downtown areas. Businesses such as Penny's and Sears, once in the core of town, moved out of town. Even colleges and universities that were in town moved to the suburbs, as well as the neighborhood movie theaters. This added to the problem of inner city decay and poverty, an ongoing trend that cities like Covington and Newport are just now overcoming to some degree. The 70s also brought with it one of the nation's worst disasters, as mentioned, the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, 169 dead, nearly 100 injured. A long list of new and revised building codes were at least one positive from the event. Brighter highlights of the 80s and beyond, sports legends, Steve Cawthon, Jim Bunning, Dave Justice, and many others are included in the book, as well as the actresses, movies, Broadway stars, singers are mentioned. You've got Rain Man and George Clooney, Leroy Reams. We've got Kenny Price, Skeeter Davis. Carly Pierce is even in the book. She's a new country singer that is making it big. We have other tragedies that are outlined in the book, the Newport fireworks explosion, the Simon Kenton High School explosion, and the Carrollton bus crash, plane crashes as well. I detail the bowling alleys and roller rinks and some of the other recreational and entertainment options that we had in those days. A few of those are still open, thank goodness. And we get to the recent revitalization and development of some of the inner city towns. The Newport on the Levee, the Bavarian Brewery remodel, South Shore condos, the Boone Block, and many other things are featured as well. And I say that the book is up to date because I bring you up to the building of the Ark Encounter at Williamstown, now one of the region's busiest tourist attractions. I close out the book, though, with the fact that we still have a lot of old-time River City charm. Cities like Augusta, downtown Williamstown, Brooksville, Carrollton, Flemingsburg, even parts of downtown Florence still have that, and Maysville, of course, has that old River City charm, and that tickles me because that's what I like as opposed to the urban city growth. But that, folks, is a brief history of Northern Kentucky and how it came about. And again, I appreciate everyone coming here today, and I give thanks to you, and I give thanks to the University Press for publishing the book. It came out a couple of years ago. But and I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I have to tell you this story with the cover problems. I came up with this cover design. As you can see, I took that old picture, the old painting of Godfrey Frankenstein, and I have a picture of Covington's riverfront, part of Northern Kentucky. So I go from old to new, and I thought that was just fabulous, and I sent that down to University Press, and they sent a remake, not uncommon. They had the same exact design, but they had Cincinnati as the skyline. Oh. I blew up. I typed up an email and I showed it to my wife, and she said, "Oh dear God, you cannot send that." I said, "What do you mean?" And I looked over it again, but I basically told them, "Listen, I'll find another publisher, but you have just proven my point. Yeah. We're talking about a history of Northern Kentucky. You want to put Cincinnati on? Well, it's just a more recognizable city land size." I said, "Well, so is New York. Why don't we just put New York on there?" But they said, okay, we'll go with your design. So there's the book, 325 pages, 6x9, over 50 photographs, on sale for $30 out there. I appreciate it very much. The website also, real easy to remember. It's bobtheauthor.com. And again, I really appreciate your time today. I hope you enjoyed the talk.